No, you want to do it next time?
I'm not here for you next time.
You know what, I would want to do myself, but I'm embarrassed. I wish I was including them. I want to be interested. But I thought we should be at the end.
I do. How are you?
Oh, yeah, good.
Hey, yeah.
Good. Hi. Yeah.
Masha.
Right. I didn't know it's not the same type of she's only coming yeah.
But now it's not anymore.
Right. Oh, did he tell you someone said that? Yeah, there was Listen, is it tomorrow night or Thursday? Wednesday. She's great. She's very good, so I'm gonna listen to that. It's not the same as Thursday. I know, but it is. I see how I feel. I have to ask Wednesday. So it should be okay. It's for me routine.
Good evening.
Jordan?
Hello, we will begin. In Israel, we say, I can't get out in the rain, Mata Suyami Sukar. You're made out of sugar, you're going to melt there in the rain. Actually, I'm glad that not everybody has arrived yet, or whatever size group we have for today. Just want to ask you, ladies, I know some people and some are new faces. When we started, like a million years ago before COVID, we were studying women in Tanakh. And we were studying inside. Yes, I will. We were studying women in Tanakh, and we were indulging, And I actually would love to continue with that. I stopped during COVID because I never knew who the audience was, and I also always wanted every class to kind of stand on its own 2 feet, so that you did. But with these classes, you kind of have to attend or continue, because we start by exploring a woman, usually her story, and then we build on it. So what is your suggestion with this? Do we have a group here that will continue regularly? Should I go back to that?
I think so too, and I really think that we should really speak to the rest. 3 classes in a row for some of us is like a lot. And they put you in the beginning and Amy at the end. And I don't know Rabbi Schacht, I've never learned with him. And I would like the 2 of you to be together so I could do 2.
I see.
I
couldn't speak to you about that.
That's what I think.
It could be.
It's a lot. And of course, this time of year, the parking and then leaving, you try to park, it's a whole thing.
Right. Well, that's going to stop in a week, I imagine. But I think you should take it up with your rabbi.
Sees my email coming, he's like, oh, what again?
No, good. You're tuning into what the women want and where we're going with is important. Sure.
It is long, I find it. especially if you have an early morning, I do too, but I push myself.
Whatever suits you. Yes.
I think it's a good idea to do women of the Tanakh or personality, something Tanakh.
Yeah, we didn't only do women. You know, we were doing stories. We didn't only do women. We sometimes, behind every story is a woman. So we always,
That was
but
fascinating.
yeah, I would love to continue with that.
I
you
would
know.
too. I thought it was
Okay, as long as we have a group that's coming and we can continue and so on, so that, okay, good. However, this class today is not that because I didn't know and I wasn't sure. And he wrote down Rachel, but that was not going to be the topic of this class. It's maybe my fault because I assumed that initially I told him we were going to do Rachel in a couple of classes. And then, no, I didn't bring any, no, we have none today. We don't need them. You'll see, it'll be more frontal. Please excuse me. But I thought I would do something a little bit different this class, and I didn't inform, he didn't call, so I apologize. So what did I want to do this class? Once again, because in this class, I thought it will be already class number 3 with in person. And maybe, if we have a group that's committed, then we'll go back to what we used to do. And I wanted to wait on that. I didn't just want to introduce it now. Good evening. Oh, I have to turn on the mic. Okay, this was all business, so I'm glad that wasn't on. Okay, we'll begin. Our topic for tonight is, we are right in between Shabbat Mevarchim, the Shabbos which we bless this oncoming month of Kislev, and Rosh Chodesh, which finds itself on Yom Shishi, on Friday this week. So I thought to myself, what a perfect time to speak about the month of Kislev. There's going to be a lot of talk about, obviously, Hanukkah coming up from many different. I thought, well, let's just talk about the month of Kislev. And that's what I'd like to do now. So first and foremost, Kabbalah teaches us that every month has its unique energy. Comment on that. What does that mean? And if you know what that means, then where is it getting its energy from? Good. Okay, so one way of looking at or trying to hone in on the energy of that month is looking at the mazalot. What are the mazalot? The constellations. And, we sometimes think that is not very Jewish, and this is not true. Many great rabbis studied astronomy, but it's just one component. And as a matter of fact, as we speak about the other components, our rabbis tell us that all of these work together in a very interesting way, and they are able to channel to this world from the spiritual realms the energy of that month. So yes. Then go ahead.
The year is cyclical, so it goes around like this, but it goes up.
Yes.
So every time
Spiral.
it comes to Kislev, you're on that plane, and Nissan is on this plane, a different level of it.
Good.
But it keeps going around and upward.
Thank you. Thank you. As with ourselves as well. Every year we're supposed to, it's kind of a whole new year, new cycle. No, but it should be the type of cycle that's upward bound, in a kind of way where we are not the same person we were last year, but this new year we are spiraling upward. Thank you. Yeah, we are. So the first thing you said was the mazal. Anybody know anything about Mazel when it comes, not Mazel, Mazel's the wrong pronunciation. Mazalot, the constellation when it comes to any other months? Which one is most? Adar is the fish. And the scales for Tishrei. So yeah, we're familiar with this. This is not deep Kabbalah that is only known to the wisest of men. And only those who study Kabbalah. So we see that this is also, it's there for the masses to tune into. So we'll come back to the Mazel of Kislev in a moment. What else? Don't think too deep. Just
Connected to seasons also.
Connected to
Seasons.
Seasons, true. Except that we have like 4 seasons of the year, but 12 months. So we have groups of months. Yes, definitely. We're definitely going to. Yeah, we're definitely going to focus on the element of what's very seasonable at this time in Israel, which is rain. Okay, so we'll touch upon that as well. What else?
Holidays?
Holidays, yes. The holidays fall in the month, And definitely they're connected to the energy of the month. And we'll talk about that as well. What do we do with those months that don't really have holidays? No problem, we just make them up, So like in Hebrew you say like siba lemisiba. We don't, siba means an explanation for or proof of or any reason for. Misiba means a party. So we don't need a siba lemisiba, fine. So we have the holidays that fall in the month. How about the name of the month? Remember, when we studied Tanakh, we've always focused on it. When we encountered persona people, we didn't quite understand who they were, where they were coming from. There's not so much in Tanakh that really describes these people. So what's in a name? Like, the name is the essence. How do we know that, by the way? From where? We know it from the animals. In Gan Eden, at some point, shortly before they were banished from Gan Eden, Adam and Eve were sent out on their shlichut, on their mission in this world. Hashem instructed Adam that he should kind of position himself in a place, and all the animals would come before him, and he would call them by name. So it's interesting that in the Hebrew language, many animals, their names are connected to their essence, and that's what he saw. Some we don't know. But by all means, definitely, we can tell that many of those names really originate in a very sublime thought. So the name is the essence. How do we know this with human beings? The name, the essence, the life force. When God forbid somebody is not well, we change the name. Why do we change the name? You know what? I take that back. Not necessarily changing, but add a name. Thank you. Add a name. In a way, it's changed because from then on, they actually should be called that name, including the new added name. So what does that do? It's just a name. It's something so external and it seems superficial. It changes the mazel. In which way?
Hopefully a better way.
What is a name? A name is the life force of a person. So that life force can be seen as a conduit, as a pipe. Through this pipe, God is drawing down into this world the energy force of that person. What's the most, I shouldn't say well-known, but it is quite well-known that there was a person in Jewish history who brought about a revival amongst the Jewish people. Until his time, there was a kind of distinction between those who were learned and those who were not learned, the simple folk, the Baal Shem Tov. And his name was Yisrael. Rabbi Yisrael. Baal Shem Tov is an acronym for, it's Besht, Baal Shem Tov, master of a good name. But what does that mean? Well, in general, it's about there are other Baal Shem Tovs, but for him, other people who were also called by that term. There's Rabbi Eliyahu, Baal Shem Tov, and so on. However, in his case, he was really a master of a good name because there's something very strongly connected between his name and the Jewish people at that time. It was a terrible time. There were pogroms, Chmielnicki, horrible. And under this kind of pressure from outside came also the pressure from inside. Difficult life. People were barely getting by the skin of their teeth. And so who was studying? Only those who could afford to. Who were learned? Only those who were supported by their father-in-laws. And there was this like rift between those who were learned, those who were in the know, and the simple folk. And it was a terrible time. If you think about it in that regard, we could have had two nations, God forbid. So along came Rabbi Yisrael. So why was he called Yisrael? Because Am Yisrael at that time needed to be revived. And just like a person who is in a excuse me, who's in a faint, we call him by their name to revive him. So Rabbi Yisrael came along to Am Yisrael bearing their name and brought about a revival to the Jewish people at large.
I think also Yisrael has all the Rashi tables of all the imahos.
All the avos and imahos. Yes, that's for homework. Find it. Yisrael. Okay, so we have here the element of the name. We have the element of the mazel. Anything else? You may not know this. I didn't know it until I came across it. So it's not general knowledge. Please don't feel uncomfortable. According to Kabbalah, every month was created with a certain association with the Hebrew letter. Some have more than one letter, some have only one letter. So there's a letter. How do we know that letters have life force of a sort? So how do we know that they have, letters have energy? Connected to a letter in the Torah, but the letter itself has energy. That's good. Its shape, its form has significance. What about the actual letter? Well, what do we do with letters? We put them together and create words.
Thing part that you can use, that you put them together, you know, boils it down to that one thing.
The core of matter, so to speak, when it comes to words. So if we take these letters and we put them together to word, they have a lot of energy. How do we know?
Hashem added letters to someone's name, like Abraham and Sarah.
Thank you for calling attention to Hashem. Start before Avram and Sarah. Start way from the beginning.
Hashem is even referred to in that way. And just
Before we even knew that name.
Hashem, with the 10 others,
The building
is the
blocks.
creation of the world.
Creation. How was the world created? Vayomer Hashem. Speech. Hashem took letters, put them together, uttered them, and they were the force. They were the energy, matter that created this physical matter, whatever that means. But here we understand that letters are of significance. So if we find in Kabbalah that months derive energy from a letter that's associated with them, there must be some kind of significance to that, and we'll touch upon that as well. And one more thing is that, I'll give you a hint. There are so many months, and there's so many of this component.
And also compared to body parts.
Sorry?
The months are compared to body parts.
Okay, I don't really know much about that. Evidently you do.
I think, no.
Months. We're talking about months. At how many? 12. Shvatim. So in Kabbalah, it's also brought down that there is a parallel between every individual shevet, their tribe, and their month. In other words, there's a certain, like this month, we are taking our energy via the medium of this shevet. It's interesting. So we'll get to that soon. Okay, so let's begin with the name. What's in a name? So where would I go with this? You know, what in the world does Kislev mean? Sorry? Is it even Hebrew? Excellent question. You know what? The Jewish kids in Israel, they figure it out. Let me tell you, mommy, daddy, why it's called Kislev. Kiss means pocket. Lev, it sounds like heart, but it's really not because it's Lamed Vav. So it's a numerical value 36. Lo means unto him, right? So here I am, Avi, right? Kislev, Hanukkah geld, take from your pocket and give to him 36 shekels. No, it's straight from Torah. But that's not really the reason. So what does it really mean? So when we want to try to find out what is the essence of a month, and coming from the perspective of its name, let's see if the month is mentioned anywhere in our sources. So I open the Tanakh and I look and I see if it's mentioned there. But in truth, that wouldn't be the absolute proper way to do things when it comes to the names of the month. Why? What do we know about the names of the month? In the Torah, it's a Chodesh HaRishon, a Chodesh HaShvi. That's in the Torah. What about Nach? What about Nevi'im? What about Ksuvim? Maybe? Well. How about if we recall, where did these names come from? Obviously not mentioned in Torah. From Bavel. When the Jewish people came back from Babylonia after the first exile, they came back with the language that was, now the Jews always spoke Hebrew, but the youngsters picked up the local language. What language was that? Babylonian and Akkadian, and also Aramaic. So some people maintain that Babylonian is Aramaic. Some people maintain that it's not. Anyways, Babylonian comes from the word Bavel, Blal, it's a mix, so it may be a mix of all kinds of languages. Be that as it may. So they brought back these names. Why? Because it was very important for them to maintain the days, the months, the weeks, everything. Why so important, the months? Because of Yom Tov. And if they were living in Israel, then they would have, how would they know when Pesach would fall out? There's Beth Din, and people would come give testimony based on the moon. But they're in Bavel now. They don't, initially they didn't have an immediate Beth Din. And so they needed to really know if they did it according to reality. We're not 100% sure how it worked. There's certainly later, but that was already much later at the time of the Second Temple era. The First Temple era, they tried to hang on to what was done before because they wanted to express their belief in God. He had told Yechezkel that it'll be 70 years. We'll be back after 70 years. So we don't have to establish a whole new way of life. There were some people who were still alive in those 70 years. So they took on temporarily the names of the months that they had in Bavel. And then when they came back to Eretz Israel, they just started using those names. They became accustomed to it. And those kind of stuck. I guess it's easier than saying the second, the third, especially with children, the third. Okay, let me start counting. And then, of course, we have this whole discussion about when is the first month. Is it Tishrei? Is it Nisan? So complicated, right? So they brought back these names. And so if we want to find them anywhere in Torah, we're not going to look in the Torah part of the Tanakh, not in the Chumashim. Because there, if it came from Bavel, that's not the era. If it came from Bavel, then we have the Nevi'im, the prophets, and the Ksuvim. It might be there. And we know that we may find it. How so? Because the last of the three prophets, anybody remember their names? Haggai, Zechariah, and Malachi, they were the ones that returned with the Jewish people to Eretz Yisrael after the destruction of the first BRS Midrasha, after the Galut, after the 70 years. They were alive, they were functioning, and there are books of Haggai, Zechariah, Malachi. So that's where I went to look. And I found only two psukim that mention. I have Vayi b'shnat arba leDaryavish HaMelech, and it was in the 4th year of King Daryavish, on the 4th day of the 9th month, Kislev. So this helps us, 9th month, Kislev. It's written in the Tanakh. The word of Hashem came to Zechariah. Later at the end of this, oh my goodness, I better rush. Okay, we'll come back to Haggai and we'll see what he says. So we have the name. And once we have the name Kislev, and we're lucky with Kislev because the other months are not necessarily mentioned in the Tanakh at all. We know it from the Gemara, from the Talmud, and even then, not all of them. Some in tradition, which we actually came across later. Yes, sorry? Megillah Esther has, yes.
Adar and Nisan.
Yes, it has, but I don't think it has Kislev. No. Okay.
Just these two.
Yes. So once we have it, we see it written. We're exploring, so we know this is the name that is called in the Tanakh. So what does it mean? What do we do now? What could we do? Well, look at that name and see if we can find any words in Torah, in the Tanakh, that are similar. So we're very, very lucky because our sages didn't even have a thesaurus, and we have a computer. So all you have to do is put it in, and if you have the right programs, it'll tell you. So you ask Rabbi Google, he's very knowledgeable. And so he brought up, and this is what he directed me to a pasuk in Job, that says, Im samti zahav kisli, v'laketem amarti miftachi. English. Did I put my reliance on gold or regard fine gold as my bulwark? Reliance. That's how it's translated. Kisli. Reliance. Let's take another pasuk. In Mishlei, Proverbs. For Hashem will be your trust. He will keep your feet from being caught. Another one in Tillim. Vesimu belokim kislam, once again in English, they may put their confidence in Hashem and not forget Hashem's great deeds, but observe his commandments. So what's the word that you've heard repeatedly? Reliance, confidence, trust. So our sages tell us that the word kislev is connected with the concept of trust, bitachon. The energy of this month is bitachon and trust in Hashem. Now, this is kind of interesting because I found a source that said that the word in Akkadian is kisilimo, and that word means trust in Akkadian. So that's kind of interesting. And another thing, there's also a Hebrew word in Torah that speaks about the fattier part of the meat. Where would that be? It would be in Sefer Vayikra, right? The korbanot. What do you do with this part, and what do you do with that portion of? And the flanken is the ksilim, right? That's what it's called. And in today, it's also called that. So, how do we connect this? What do we do with this? We spoke about the element of trust. We spoke about something that's like fatty. Where is this coming from? So fatty implies abundance, more than necessary, excessive. And since Kislev means trust, this is a month where there should be a tremendous amount of trust in God. And it's the type of month that is appropriate to intensify and draw from the abundance of trust and therefore have an abundance of belief in God. How is it connected to the season? Since this is the season of rain, as such, this is the time of the year where God demands our trust in believing that He is the source of all sustenance, and that man can utilize this energy of Kislev to intensify his trust and belief in Hashem. That's how the month of Kislev is understood in this way. So we can also use this to understand the connection between the letter of Kislev, which is actually in its, I don't know if, I never studied this, so I can't say that all the letters of the months, their letter is in their name. I imagine that it should be so, but here it is definitely so, because I looked it up, and its letter is Samach. So it's Kabbalah, and I'm not going to go into that because I didn't understand it, so I can't share it. But one thing I did understand is that the Hebrew word Samach, many letters have names that are actual words and imply something. Suggestion. Bet. Bet as in bayit, right? Bet, and it looks like a house and so on. So an Aleph is Alufo Shel Olam, which is like the commander-in-chief, an Aluf in the army, if anybody's familiar with that. Commander-in-chief of the world, Aleph, first, one and only. So Samach, anybody? Sorry? Rely. Lismoch al mishu is to rely on someone. By the way, that's the source, the root of the word smicha. What's smicha? This rabbi gives him smicha. What does that mean? You're a student, but because you passed this test and you know the answers to this exam, we can now rely upon you halachically. Ani somech yadi alav. I'm putting my hands on top of him. You can just trust him with it. That's with a sin, and that's a smicha also with a chaf, the same chaf, but it's interesting because it makes sense to a certain degree, because in Hebrew there are letters that are interchangeable. So we guess we can find it also connected to smicha, in which we cover, we feel assured, we feel comfortable, and so on. But this is the somech. We say it every single day in our tefillah. Baruch Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam. Somech noflim. What is somech noflim? He supports. We can rely. I got your back, says Hashem to us. So it's connected also to the letter, to the interpretation of the name of this month. And let's move on with this to see what else we can do with this. So what's the mazel of this month? Anybody? It's an archer. An archer, as in this. No, Kislev. Kislev. Now we're in Cheshvan. But Kislev's coming up. So it's an archer. And Hebrew, anybody? Kashat. An archer would be a kashat, but it's definitely connected to keshet. Why is it connected to keshet? Because that's the shape of the bow of the arrow, right? But we also have rainbow here. Where does rainbow come into play here? So it's interesting to note, and I looked this up, but not 100%. In other words, I came to like one day, and it makes sense that that's when it happened. So when did Noach leave the Teva? Remember, the whole story took an entire year. We know the first day was Yud Zayin Cheshvan. That's what we marked during the month of Cheshvan, so 17. And then the following year, on the 17th day, and then 10 days later, because he sent out the birds, so 10 days later is Kaf Zayin Cheshvan. And then we find that Hashem spoke to him, and there were three things that Hashem said. The first, he spoke to him, telling him, it's over, you can come out. Then he told him, he gave him permission, anybody know? To eat meat. They were vegetarian until that time. And now, we're not going to discuss this topic, but now they were allowed, all humanity was allowed, if all humanity was vegetarian. All, because these were Bnei Noach. Sorry?
They were humanity.
They were humanity, that's true. But I'm saying all humanity before them also did not eat meat. And now humanity was allowed to eat meat. So that was the second thing that he was told. And the Psukim, the way the Psukim describe it, some Shabbos afternoon, look in the Psukim and you'll see. So, and Hashem said, come out of the Teva. And Hashem said, now dwell in the land and you can eat. And I've given you all this, for your sustenance, because it was like the end of the world. And now we have to start from scratch. And the third thing he told him was about the rainbow. This was the covenant, this was the bris that Hashem created between himself and Noach, and for that matter, humanity at that point. So what I understood from this was that there were like three amirot there, three different utterances. And it wasn't like a dialogue that Hashem said something and Noach replied. So it could make sense that these were three utterances. They were directives. Hashem was addressing Noach, and maybe because it says Vayomer, and then again Vayomer, it could have been all in one saying. So maybe it was 3 separate days. Make sense? And also they had to get out of the Teva, right? So they're coming out of the bris of the covenant with the rainbow didn't happen in the Teva. We know that for sure. Why? Because you couldn't see a rainbow from the Teva. So they had to come out. So first he tells them to come out, and then and so on, and then he tells them what's available to them, and then he gives them this covenant. So it makes sense that this might have spanned 3 days. Could it maybe from Chaf Zayin 3 days? Rosh Chodesh Kislev. So could it be that the actual original rainbow first appeared in the world on Rosh Chodesh Kislev, and is somehow connected to Kislev? Could definitely be. I don't have a makar for this. I don't have an absolute proof, but it's definitely close in that time. Shortly after the flood ended and they came out of the Teva, shortly after was the rainbow, very close to. Now, what is the mazel of Kislev? It's the archer. But this is also strongly connected to the very, what is the archer? It's the arch. And a kashet is a kashat. It's the same exact word. So we find here a connection between the bris of the rainbow, that kashet, and the kashat, which is the archer. Okay, makes sense? Let's move on with this. What does this mean? I'd like to draw a kind of parallel between the keshet and the kashat. Let's start with the kashat. The kashat is the archer. What does the bow and arrow look like? Nothing deep, simple, straightforward. So there's this half circle, right? And then this is the string, this is the bowstring. And then there's the arrow. By the way, it's interesting. Hebrew language is amazing. Like this is a keshet, but it's only half a circle. So the chetz is chetzi, because the bowstring divides this circle into half, and this is the chetz. So when we think chetz, we think the arrow and the pointed arrow. No, it's about the half circle. Interesting. So where is this archer coming from? He has his mark. He wants to reach that mark. And so he takes his bow and arrow and he shoots. He needs to be skilled, unless he's just playing around. He needs to be strong. He needs to have patience. And hopefully he'll reach his mark. What is the shape of the bow when he is in the act of arching, if that's a word?
Circle. Almost like a circle.
It's not a circle, it's the half circle. But he's pulling back. Oh, I see what you mean. He's pulling back the bowstring, so it makes like a circle. Nice. I didn't think of that. Thank you. I'm not quite sure what the significance is. I was actually wanted to focus on the bow because we're speaking here about the keshet, and this is the shape of a keshet. That's why he's called a kashat, because the bow, as in rainbow. So what is the shape of it? It's this half circle. Where is the opening of this half circle? Where is it directed? Is it facing him, or is he facing his target? It's facing him. In other words, he kind of marks himself. It's interesting, it's called a marksman. He marks himself with that bow. It's focused on him. Now I have to focus, I have to think, me, my capacities, my skills, my experience, my strength, and I'll meet my mark. That's a kashat. That is an archer. But when it comes to a keshet, what is the keshet about? It's about the relationship between Hashem and the Jewish people. So it's Hashem's keshet. What's its shape? Comparing it to the archer? The other way. Instead of kind of honing in on the marksman, it's actually embracing the world. It's opening to the world. And that's what the original keshet was all about. It was about the relationship between Hashem and the Jewish people, because it was a bris, it was a covenant. And what was it about? A general bris? Many of the britot in Torah are all, okay, this agreement, you do this, I'll do that. You must, I'm your God, you must do this. This is different. In which way is it different?
It's one way.
It's one way. It's from there coming this way. And it's not focused on he who pulls the string or the arrow, but rather on the people. So no matter where you are, no matter how you are, really what's behind a keshet? Really, the generation was not behaving accordingly. And so Hashem really wanted to bring about some kind of calamity and punishment. But he has a reminder. Instead of the punishment, he sets out that keshet, that beautiful rainbow, as a reminder to Hashem, I will not destroy the world again. That's what the covenant of the keshet is all about. So it's a reminder to Hashem that he made a promise never to destroy the world, no matter what. So there's an embrace to this creation. And under all circumstances, it's like, you're not deserving, but I love you anyway. You don't have merit, but I care for you anyway. You did what you did yesterday, and you didn't even do proper tshuva, but I forgive you anyway. This is what the keshet symbolizes. So look at the difference between the keshet and the kashat. This is God, this is human. It's interesting to note that there was one marksman who got it a little differently. And he actually changed the manner a bit. And there are plenty of others who used his same method, but we know about this fellow. What am I talking about? Give you a hint. Somebody who had a target. He had to get that target. David. Why didn't he use a bow and arrow? Sorry? Right, but why didn't he use a bow and arrow? David was a warrior. You know, he was good at these things. He's a good archman. A lot of practice, unfortunately, had to wage wars and so on, even before this. What is this? Where is that sling? You hold the sling, you take the pebble, whatever he had there, the stone, you put it in the sling, it pulls towards him, right? So this creates that arch, right? This creates the keshet. So it's not the archer's keshet focusing on him. It's a godly keshet focusing outward. So David tunes into Hashem's type of keshet. Does that make any sense? So now if we try to pull these things together, we're talking about a month that has an abundance because of the rain, so it's fertile and it grows, an abundance of trustworthiness, an abundance of emunah. Speaking about the keshet where Hashem embraces us no matter where we hold. Taking an example from David HaMelech, where he knows that this doesn't make any sense whatsoever. Why? Because Goliath was 100% right. He was a giant and this was a little guy. Even for regular guys, he was a little guy. He was a shorty. So, Mazda, Hashem, I put my total trust in you. It's not about me. These are the Kislev energies that are coming together in this way. And he knew then that Hashem would somech alav. He would be able to be there for him, support him. And he was able to protect him. This is where David HaMelech is coming from. But there's one step further. What's symbolic about David and Goliath and the holiday of Hanukkah? It falls in this month. It's not for naught. Nothing's a coincidence. We say it in our davening. We say it in our praises of Hashem as to thank you for all the great miracles. What was one of the elements? What was like one of the miracles? How many were there of them and how many were there of these? You know, it was David and Goliath. The few against the many. The strong against the weak. That's where it's coming from. It's not for naught that here we have the God's keshet embodied in David HaMelech. And where does this lead to? When we celebrate Hanukkah, so what are we celebrating? The story of Hanukkah, as we know, the Maccabee time. So I found a source, the Siddur Yavetz, Rabbi Yaakov Emden, says that actually it was preceded by previous Hanukkahs. Because why is it called Hanukkah? Chanukah Hey. That's what we say. And that came because of this particular engagement in war. But the day of Hanukkah, that day of celebration, is mentioned in Torah and is mentioned later also in the Chumash and in the Navi. I have a couple of minutes, I want to read it inside. So the Yalkut Shimoni says as follows, I'm translating. On Kaf Hey Kislev, it was, the building of the Mishkan was concluded. Whoever thought of that, Kaf Hey Kislev, that's when it was concluded. But it was, Mishkan Mekupal, it was folded and set aside until the first day of Nisan. Because Chanukas HaMishkan happened on Rosh Chodesh Nisan. There was a reason for that. But it was concluded on Kaf Hey Nisan. What do you do when you conclude building a house? You make a Chanukas Habayis, the dedication of the new home. So it should have happened on Kaf Hey Kislev. We're talking Torah times, desert time, not Maccabees. So, and it says, on the first day of the month, you shall erect the Mishkan. That is Rosh Chodesh. But in actuality, it was prepared before. And some of the Jewish people were kind of complaining to Moshe. It's done already. We put so much effort in this. Let's erect it. Let's do Hanukkah. Let's have a party. Hanukkah Sabayis. It's a time of celebration. And why aren't you building? Is there something wrong with what we had put together here? So Moshe said, no, this is from Hashem. There's a reason that I want it to happen in the Chodesh Nisan and in Rosh Chodesh Nisan, but I will appease Kaf Hey Kislev. This will be a day of dedication. So it's not going to be for the Mishkan, but it's going to be a day later on in history. When is that and what is that? So anybody would say it's the Maccabees, right? Because what did they do? They came in, they were metaher, they purified the Beit HaMikdash, everything that was impure, and they were able to begin once again and resume the building, the service in the Beit HaMikdash. But actually, he's referring to something totally different. So I'm just going to read one pasuk from here. 1 second. Where is my pasuk? I want the day, and I may not have taken that day. Oh, here we go. Bayom 24 b'chodesh hashishi. So what is the chodesh hashishi? That's a 6 months. So what happened in the 6 months, which if we're counting from Nisan, because this is about kings, so we're counting from Nisan. So we're talking which chodesh? Elul. So here is a directive. What was the directive? Hashem turned to Haggai Hanavi. Remember we said in the beginning that that's where it's mentioned, Kislev? And he tells Haggai Hanavi, go tell the Jewish people. What is he telling them? Wait a minute, 70 years are up. You came back to Eretz Israel. What's everybody busy with? Building their homes. What about the home of God? Its time has not yet come, said the people. We're not ready for it yet. First I build my own home, then I built God's home. God said, long overdue. And he gave a directive. You must begin to build this home. And it's very strong words of Hashem. Very, well, I'm not going to read them. We don't have time, and I'd rather not read them. This is what needed to be done. And that's the reason that you're having such a hard time now in this country. I'm concluding in a minute. Because the land is not being fertile. It's not giving up its fruit. It's giving forth its fruit because you are ignoring the whole reason that you came back to Eretz Israel for. Build this temple. And so they started collecting all the materials and building bit by bit. And it came together. Vayhi dvar Hashem shenit el Chagai be-24 lachodesh. And this time it came on the 24th day of the month, which is, that month was Kislev. Now, indeed, the Beis HaMikdash took more time to be built. But what did Hashem tell him here? It's okay. You haven't built the entire Beis HaMikdash, but I see that Am Yisrael has put forth energy towards it. You want to do what needs to be done now and prepare this world to be a receptacle for spirituality. Good. Build on this day the Mizbeach. That doesn't take so long to build. The altar should be built. Build the Mizbeach, but we don't even have the temple. First you build the house, then you build what's in it. No. Start doing the service. Even if you don't have the building itself, you can bring sacrifices on the Mizbeach, the Navi told them. So this was said on the 24th of the month of Kislev. And so they did it. And they finished it the following day. And the following day, they did Chanukas HaMizbeach. So prior to Hanukkah, we had Chanukas HaMishkan. They didn't celebrate, but that's what happened that day. And we have Chanukas HaMizbeach. And then came the story of the Maccabees. Much later, we're talking here right before the building of the second temple. The Maccabees came 300 years into that. So the Hanukkah was already a name. The holiday was already a celebration. So when the great miracles happened on Hanukkah, so they said, you know what, we'll call it Hanukkah, not Chanukas Habayis, but Hanukkah. And that's where the name Hanukkah came from. And it's about the individual being able to overcome the one and the many, and the energy of the month of Emunah and Bitachon, and that Hashem relies upon us and that he embraces us. And so may it happen that this Hanukkah will celebrate in the third Beis HaMikdash. Amen. Thank you very much.
I have a question. I once learned, there's somebody that the archer, because you can't just throw it anywhere, it has a certain direction, and it's somehow related to Torah, that gives us direction. Something in the word Torah, the archery, the archer. I learned it so many years ago, I don't remember exactly, but because you can't just shoot it and you have to aim and come just, there's something to do with direction. So here's the thing. I mean, I learned it so long ago that I don't remember, but it made sense to me because you can't hold your sides. And you can't just leave it to talk, you have to really think, just like the Torah, give it a direction, like a flow. I don't know that. Probably good.
Good night.
Mr. Karki?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Karki?
Next time, could you please have a microphone every time, please, please,
Ah.
please. It's very hard to hear, it's just wonderful.
She just wants everyone to come closer. That's her way of.
Well, I can't get, unless I sat on her lap, I would really think I need a mic. Am I right? Just straight a little bit. Thank you. Yeah, she's going
Shalom Aleichem, everyone. Hope you're doing well. We're excited as we're picking up steam, resuming the Midrasha as it once had. So the topic we started speaking about last week was the notion of, improperly translated as really fear, really we're speaking about awe. We're talking about Yiras Hashem. That sounds, again, very generic, very cliche, kind of like that's what we should all be focusing on at all times, and yet all too often we don't really delve into it in depth. And as mentioned, Ramchal at the beginning of his Sefer, Mesilas Yesharim, quotes Chazal that say, Hein Yiras Hashem Chachma. And it says, Hein, B'lashon Yevani, Chazal say, is Echad. The singular wisdom is Yiras Hashem. Every other wisdom is not a true wisdom. The only true wisdom is fear/awe of Hashem. That's very funny to us, because physics seems like real wisdom. Biology is wisdom. Gemara is wisdom. Yiras Hashem, we experience more of like a fuzzy emotion. What does it mean that that's a real wisdom? So part of Ramchal's Sefer and part of his life endeavor is explaining the depths of what it actually means. On a deeper level, to properly, Rav Chaim Vital writes this in the beginning of his Shari Kedusha, student of the Arizal, to properly experience awe of Hashem. Not just fear, like, oh, I'm going to get punished, something bad's going to happen to my family member, but genuine awe. It almost requires a deep esoteric understanding of the world and how Hashem operates in the world. To truly have a sense to who you're dealing with, because the awe only is when you're aware of in whose presence you are. That will only happen if you have a deeper understanding about how, we don't know anything about his essence, but how he operates, anything else about him. So now all of a sudden you have to get into esoteric understandings to be able to really appreciate awe. Anyway, so we started last week with the Perek Kaf Hey here in the Ramchal and his Mesilas Yesharim. And we spoke about the fact that he says, I'm going to tell you now how to go about acquiring it. If you remember, just to jog our memories, there were 3 different types of Yiras Hashem. Number 1, he says, is very easy. It's very simple. It's more for children. And that's fear. Anyone who has a brain that thinks, well, if I have a soul, if you believe you have a soul, and then when the world comes to an end, what happens to my soul? Something. Presumably just because my body decomposes doesn't mean my soul decomposes. So something happens to it afterwards. Presumably, if I believe that there is a entity that created the world that said, don't kill, don't steal, and then my soul continues living after this world, presumably there'll be some type of, he's just, there's some type of reward and some type of punishment. So you only have to be self-absorbed and selfish to think for a second, something bad might happen to me if I don't listen to what Hashem wants. That's basic level fear. Kids don't want to get in trouble. They want their lollipop. We all want to not have bad things happen to us. So that's level number 1. Level number 2 is what was described a little bit more in terms of the awe. You're in the presence of a grandeur. You have an awe. You're not going to do something, not because it's not in my self-interest, but because it's inappropriate. When you're in the presence of a special individual, you're not going to want to do something like that. He goes on to say the 3rd level is that a person has what's called yiras chet, fear of sin. Now, for many of us, yiras chet is almost can be associated with neurosis. People that are so afraid to do anything, sometimes it almost seems to be coming from like a not healthy place. It's like, okay, there's life. You have to be very serious, but you're so afraid about some tangential possibility. But he goes on to explain that yiras chet is when a person is so internalized Hashem's presence in this world and Hashem's will, then now it's not just in general, in fuzzy terms, I'm aware of it. So right now, let's say we're having a shir, we're talking about Yiras Hashem. So hopefully every single person is experiencing something. You're thinking something. When you go out the door and you start walking towards your car, or you start walking back to your house, for many of us, we're no longer in the I'm in a shir of Yiras Hashem perspective. Now we're in the I am now going home and getting a drink of water and do whatever else I'm going to do perspective. Yiras chet is that I've internalized this awe of Hashem to such an extent that every single thing I encounter now, I'm going to be concerned lest it take away from Hashem's honor. So you would relate to it literally the way you'd relate to a snake, right? If you put a bug in front of somebody, a kid or whatever else, they might have fun with it. No one's going to be afraid. No one's going to jump away from an ant right in front of you. If I put a snake right in front of you, you're going to jump back. when you're in the presence of possibilities to sin. So this is the highest level, where it's not just that I appreciated this deeper encounter, but now that manifests itself in basically anything, not a neurotic type way, in a healthy, emotionally balanced way, but just a rational understanding that anything can indeed, in one way or another, take away from that grandeur. Fine. What was very interesting, I thought, in last week, and this we're going to transition to this week, was that Ramchal said, how are you going to go about doing this? This was the first paragraph. And we're all aware that Hashem is watching us at all times. But he goes on to say, I'll tell you a method to acquire this yira. And he said the method is, well, if you want to read it in the first paragraph here, a person has to contemplate the following two ideas. The notion that Hashem's Shechina, Hashem's dwelling, is in every single place in this world. And number two is that Hashem's overseeing everything. Nothing too high, nothing too low. And he goes on to quote some psukim. Go to the next paragraph. Now, it's not just that I know Hashem is observing, but I know that in his presence, meaning the presence of his Shechina, which is dwelling in this world, and naturally, I'm going to be awed. Meaning, again, as we discussed last week, it's not enough just to know that the security camera's here, but if you're in the presence of the security guard, you're going to be much more conscious. Even though in theory, from a recording perspective, if you do something, right now, if someone wanted to, I don't know, vandalism, you want to break a chair in the shul. So you know the camera's watching you, but you experience it very differently when the security guard's standing there watching you about to break the chair. You experience it differently. So experiencing that Shechina so b'chol makom, Hashem's Shechina is everywhere in this world. Again, God forbid not to say that the table is Hashem, not to say that everything in the world is Hashem, but everything has a divine source, and Hashem's presence is to a certain extent dwelling here. You have a heightened sense, I'm in Hashem's presence, then you're not going to come to sin. Now I want to take a time out for a second. And last time, I made one more connection. We're going to go just a little bit deeper. And one of the things the Ramchal writes in his other work, the Derech Hashem, is that he says that when a person experiences awe, what happens is he purifies his body, and then what happens is the Shechina dwells upon him to the extent it's proportional. The extent that you experience awe of Hashem at any point in time, to that extent you purify your body from its physicality, its spiritual corruption, and then you have the Shechina presence dwelling on you. So I find that to be incredibly inspiring, motivating. Just at any point in time that I'm aware of Hashem's presence and I experience awe, I'm purifying myself and Hashem's presence is on me. But we pointed out last time that it's very interesting. How do you acquire yira? Being aware that the Shechina is in every single place. And then what happens when you experience yira? The Shechina now suddenly dwells upon you. So it's a very interesting experience. The more heightened awareness you have of Hashem's presence in this world, the more that presence then dwells upon you. Right? One more time. This is a very deep idea. The more aware we all are, right now we're all sitting in this room. So we can all think, I'm sitting in this room, I'm learning about something that's interesting or not interesting to me, whatever it is. And instead of that, I think I'm surrounded by Hashem's Shechina at this moment. And therefore I experience awe because I'm aware of this godless that's in front of me. And I'm in awe at this difference between me and this being. So that's the way to acquire yira. What happens when you acquire it? You purify your body. And now what happens is there's more Shechina's presence on you. So the more awareness you have of it outside of you, the more it starts dwelling upon you. It starts filtering in. On that note, I want to go one step further. I know this is a little bit out there and abstract, but I want to go, because once you get these ideas, the rest of your life will be different. I want to share with you one more idea. This is a commentary on the Derech Hashem. I tried making it for everyone. I was not successful. And Hashem didn't want it. But I'll read it to you. He says something phenomenal based on the deeper writings of the Ramchal. On a deeper level, whatever this means. And I find that even if we don't understand a lot of times what deeper ideas mean, they could still inspire us tremendously, even being aware of them. He writes something very fascinating. We all know that our souls have different dimensions to them. Right? Chazal described different dimensions to our souls. The very source of our soul, the shoresh of our neshama, is, in the writings they talk about, that is the Shechina. The Shechina is at the very source of our neshama. What happens when a person sins? their own neshama gets disconnected from its source because the averos that you commit and the physicality that you manifest are now separating your own soul from its very source. What happens when a person experiences yira, submission to Hashem, absolute submission and awe, and reverence? What happens is that separating factor, that divider, that sin gets removed. And now your neshama gets connected to its source. Right? I'm going to say this point again, and then I'm going to say all 3 points together because I think it's just mind-blowing. One more time. The point is that we all have a neshama. There are different dimensions to our neshama. At the very root of our neshama, where all our neshamas come from, is the Shekhinah, Hashem's dwelling in this world. A person would naturally be connected to their own source of their neshama, to the Shekhinah, were it not for the fact that we have averos, that we have sins, that we have physicality. How is that interruption get removed? When we experience awe. When we experience yira, that interruption gets removed and we're able to connect to our very source. So let's take the 3 things that we know and see how they connect so beautifully. And I know this kind of seems like in the clouds, but I promise you, once you just take this, you absorb it, it's amazing. Number 1 is how do you go about experiencing yira? We learned in Mesilas Yesharim by paying attention to the Shekhinah's presence around us. Each and every one of us right now realize the Shekhinah's b'chol makom. Once you experience, I'm in the presence, lahavdil, you're in the presence of the security guard, you feel something differently, it's not just a security camera. So too, each and every one of us, it's not just that we know Hashem's watching us, I experience that Hashem is surrounding me right now. So I'm going to experience something very differently. I'm going to have yira, I'm going to have awe of Hashem. What happens to a person when they have awe? Derech Hashem writes, Ramchal and his other sefer, you purify your physicality, and I think we all experience that. You experience a degree of kedusha that you manifest, and then by purifying your physicality, the Shekhinah's presence dwells on you to a heightened extent. Now, normally, I think of that happening outside in. I think the Shekhinah is like out there, and the Shekhinah is going to come and dwell on Simi Shabtai, right? The third point is, inside of me, inside of my soul, the source of my soul is the Shekhinah. And I am normally just detached from it because they're my physicality and my averos. When I experience awe, I am now attached to my inner source, and inevitably then I'm connected to the Shekhinah. So what happens is that by experiencing, again, heightened awareness of the Shekhinah around me, I purify my body and I experience an increased amount of Hashem's Shekhinah on me, and it's not just happening outside in. Internally, my own neshama is able to connect to its source. These, if you connect 3 different writings, so Ramchal here, Real Mesilas Yesharim, it's a beautiful, nice Musar work. There are such deep, profound ideas if we just connect the dots. So far we're talking about Yiras Shamayim. If somebody appreciated that, great. If not, you didn't. It's okay also. There's still a lot of ideas, even if you don't connect it. I found it to be life-changing. Now turn the page. If you turn the page to page 175, or Kuf Ayin Hey, I think immediately if you turn the page, it should be right there. So on the top, but this idea that you're always in the presence of Hashem, and not just that He's watching, that you're in the presence, is not something that naturally gets engraved in our minds. It requires a constant contemplation. These are not easy. Sometimes if you're, I don't know, people whose minds are good at math. So someone says 9 times 7, 100 times whatever. So you get things quickly. You have people that they're very sharp-witted, they're quick thinking. So sometimes you read certain words here, you're like, okay, go. Okay, so what's the next idea? He's telling you this is not an idea that you can just quickly kind of like jump through. This requires hisbonus, tremendous hisbonus. I was going to say before, by the way, we said that Ramchal says, Hein Yiras Hashem Yichachma. Yiras Hashem is the unique, the singular wisdom. Rav Kook explains, you know why? Every other wisdom, I can modify it and explain it to you in a shorter way. So let's say I master physics. I can now write a textbook and show you the process I went through, basically showing you the conclusions, the underlying principles that you need to apply. So each one of us, to use physics, we don't need to figure out how they figured out the principles. We can just use the principles and move on. And most of life works like that. Most of wisdom works like that. Someone learned something, they figured something out, they can communicate it to you in a more abridged form. You don't need the process. Yiras Shamayim, Rav Kook says, is the only wisdom that you must go through the process. It is the singular wisdom because it's the only one that requires. I mean, I can't just teach it to you. I can't just say this is yours, Hashem. You write it down on a piece of paper, you memorize it, boom, now you're good. You need to go through the process. So Ramchal tells you here that one of the reasons why is because you need to contemplate Hashem's presence everywhere. That is not something that you can just file it away. You have a good memory, your photographic memory, you're good to go. It needs the process. Because this is something that's so foreign from our senses. Our senses are, I touch, I feel, I smell. This is not something that you will live with. To live with this realization that at all times I am in Hashem's presence, living doesn't just mean cognitively understanding it, but applying it in your mind until a person has tremendous efforts trying to understand this and apply this. Even if you get to that level, all of Yom Kippur, you're thinking about it, Ne'ilah, you're ready to go. It can still leave you in a fleeting moment if you don't keep at it. So this is not something that's easily attainable. Even when you attain it, there's no guarantees. Now he's going to say something very important. So what's the method we say? Is constantly contemplating, meditating, thinking about these ideas. So what's the primary way to lose this awareness? It's called hesech hadas. It's just not thinking about something. We all know you can kind of like, you could be at a table, you could be talking to people, you could be doing some activity, and just like a few hours go by, and you're like, wow, like that's, I didn't even realize like where the time went. You kind of get lost. And no one's saying it's anything bad about that. But when the goal is a heightened, constant awareness of Hashem's presence, time could just go by. You didn't do it intentionally. You just simply weren't holding on to it, and it left you. You space out. It could be because there are distresses that are coming to you. I need your help here, I need your help there, and you kind of can lose it a little bit. Or you intentionally decide, I'm going to go do X, Y, Z, and you kind of lose it. Kol hesech hadas bitulu leyirat midis. Anytime a person loses this mindfulness, and this is what it is. By the way, in the year 2017, we had the presence of hosting Rav Meir Tursky, Rosh Hashiva at YU, here for Shabbos. And he spoke at Shal Shudis about Yiras Shamayim. It was one of those profound talks I ever heard him say. And one of the things he spoke about, he just used the term, he didn't make a big deal about it. It wasn't like the title of his shiur. He just used two words that I found to be so life-changing. He said it's the Yiras Shamayim, he said, is the ultimate mindfulness, which I found to be so profound because mindfulness sometimes gets applied in very mundane things. It's like, while you're tying your shoe, be mindful. While you're drinking water, be mindful. Now, what does that mindfulness do for you? For most people, what it means is you live in that experience. So I'm not just going to drink the water and it be done. I'm going to experience every moment of it. But at a certain level, you are still disconnected from any transcendent connection. You're basically just living in that physical moment. Now, as Jews, with holy neshamos, and all human beings are tasked with following in Hashem's will, you would hope that the ideal is not to be, you're eating your salad, to be completely mindful of eating your salad. 10 minutes later, wow, you had a great salad experience. What was the point of it? What was the goal of it? Just to have a real full salad experience? On a deeper level, we believe everything in some way, shape, or form is about connecting to Hashem, doing the Ratzon Hashem. You use the words, the ultimate mindfulness. When a person has an ultimate mindfulness of awareness that at all times, whatever you're doing, you're in Hashem's presence, that's a game changer. It's not just to eat your salad and drink your water and tie your shoes. It's an ultimate mindfulness of what's happening. Now he goes on to say, not much time, the last paragraph of this chapter, it's a very interesting pasuk. The pasuk in the Devarim at the end says, the Melech should make sure to have his own Sefer Torah, so that he should always be learning it, so that he will learn to fear Hashem, or to have awe of Hashem. So he says, Halamarta, what do you see from here? Apparently, real awe is only acquired through a constant intellectual process, a constant learning process. V'tidaktik shamar, look at what it says. Leman yilmad liyirah, that you should learn to have awe. Lo amar leman yirah, so that you shall awe. It's not just a button that you press. Why? Again, this is his constant thing. If you remember what Rav Kook said, this is the only wisdom. You have to go through the process. It's not about intellectual knowledge per se. It is, but it requires the process. So Ramchal said it before, and he said it again now. It's because it is fundamentally foreign to us. We are sensory beings. We see, if I told you there's a ghost in the room right now, so it would be hard for us to live with that because I'm not seeing a ghost right now, right? We live with our senses. Now, to just believe something for a second, okay, you could try to get yourself to believe it for a second. To believe it at all times, that requires a constant training. So he says it's so foreign to us. That's why the pasuk says he has to learn to have yira, not just that he acquire yira. It's so difficult for us. It's so distant because of the physicality of our senses. It's only acquired through learning, through processing. How does a person learn to have awe? It's not just basically. It's not about reading my chapter. Right? This is the chapter about learning about Yiras Shamayim. He's basically telling you, you can't just learn about it, unless a person is constantly focusing and reiterating on the ways of the Torah and what it's trying to teach you. To always be thinking about this. He quotes now the pasuk in Kriya Shema, B'shivto, v'lechto, v'shachbo, v'kumo, when you're going, when you're coming, when you're sitting, when you're standing, until this matter gets completely settled in your mind. So it sounds so simple, but he basically says, and he's paraphrasing what the Torah says. Right? The Torah says you should learn Torah, teach it to your children when you're shinantam levanecha v'dibarta bam b'shivtecha b'veisecha. Right? It says at all times you should be studying Torah. So he says a person constantly focusing on this until it becomes clear to him. If you'll allow me, I'll say something I didn't see anybody say, but it seems to be obvious. And if you're familiar with the writings of the Ramchal, also it comes out. If a person is learning in a secular mindset, what are the laws of Shabbos? What am I allowed to do? So let's say sometimes you might have a non-Jew that wants to know, what am I allowed to do? What am I not supposed to do? So they just want to know practically, what should I do? What should I not do? When a Jew relates to Torah, the assumption is in some way, shape, or form, you're connecting to something transcendent. It's not just that I'm supposed to do this and not supposed to do that. There's some deeper connection that's being forged with the presence that I'm in. And that's why if the entire time a person is focused on b'shivto, v'lechto, while you're going, while you're coming, you're always paraphrasing the psukim about Talmud Torah. Apparently you see that the goal, the deeper goal of Talmud Torah is a heightened awareness of Hashem's presence. So sometimes I find that it can almost be distancing when a person either themselves engages in Torah study or sees others engaging in Torah study, and there seems to be a disconnect. It doesn't seem to make them any more connected to something above. Like they're studying the laws the way you'd study for a law exam. Something's missing there. Ramchal's telling you the constant study of Torah is meant to give you a heightened awareness that Hashem's presence is in every single place. Right? Obviously, he's accessing a deeper component of the Torah. It's not just enough to say on Shabbos we light off candles and we eat challah and we do different things. There's a deeper awareness how Hashem's presence is in every single place by dint of your study of these ideas. Now, even if we can't access that, it's a little bit too esoteric to us. It's refreshing though to know that, to be aware of that, because otherwise you learn something that's a dry material and you basically say this is dry material. When you learn something and it sounds dry, but you have a deep awareness that there's something deeper going on there, you relate to it very differently. So he's telling you the constant focus. Again, we have to live our lives and we have to take care of our families. No one's saying not to do these things. But the ideal in Yiras Shamayim is to always be aware of Hashem's presence and then to go through that process that we described before. So I'm going to stop for right now. I know today was like a little bit all over the place, but I find that some of these ideas, they don't just go into an easy box, as he said. Right? You can't just say the bottom line conclusion, take notes, and then read it over again and be done. But they're so profound that if you're able to contemplate it, you're able to focus on it, it could really change your entire lives. Wish everyone a good night, and I'm looking forward to Mrs. Horowitz.
Question.
Yeah.
You know people who have this Yiras Shamayim, this people who move deep?
You know anyone who's like that? You're not going to know what's inside anyone else's heart. But
You can't sense it.
Rameir Tursky was there to sense it. Anytime you talk to him, anytime you're in his presence,
My best friend, she's a PR, she exuded that.
I actually have a few more minutes. If not, I'll just tell you one idea who wants to listen. If you follow some of the ideas we said that the way to acquire Yira is to have a heightened awareness of the Shekhinah's presence. And then we said when a person experiences Yira, they have more Shekhinah on them. So what does that mean? That means that when you're around holier people, there's more Shekhinah around them. And then if you're attuned to that, you're going to experience the height in Shekhinah, and then that will cause you to have more Yira. That's why we like to explain everything in life psychologically. So why, when you're around big tzaddikim, or you feel holier? Because psychologically, you want to be like them. On a spiritual level, they have a degree of Shekhinah that's on them. The way you acquire Yira is that you have a heightened awareness of what's around you. When you're around a real tzaddik, you will suddenly start experiencing more Shekhinah on you. You'll have more Yira. It's fantastic. If you actually take that,
experience that,
if you really follow that through, it's amazing.
yes, he's saying right. Okay.
I come around and say hello. When did you come down? Now it's coming this week and everything. We came down to the week of I couldn't wait to get there. Were you in Israel? How's it?
I was quoting like
How's everybody doing?
It's like I knew it was great and I
I could be playing and say,
all right. We are gonna start. Oh my gosh, this is like a real backdrop here. Okay, should we get started? Let's do it. So we're up to our part 3. Let's start because I know everyone has been out already. It's rainy. Everyone ready to go home. But we have our topic of Esav in front of us tonight. We've explored Cain, we've explored Yishmael, and tonight we'll explore Esav. And I know for those who were real loyal to the Zooms last year, we did spend a little time talking about Esav and Yaakov, but we're going to try to take a little bit of a different angle. I looked up the sources that we included last time just to be sure, and I only overlapped by 1. So I thought that's not bad. Not bad. There's a lot to say about Esav. I was impressed. I remembered the source. I was like, oh, I remember that I used this. Okay, so let's look at our original psukim here in source 1, and then we'll pose our question for tonight. So this is a very well-known story from the Chumash. Vayitrotzitzu habanim b'kirba. This is Rivka, and she feels like this struggling in her womb. Vatomer imkein lama za'anochi. Why do I exist? Why me? Why is this happening to me? We're not dealing with Rivka tonight, but it's a fascinating question. Vatelech lidrosh et Hashem, and she goes to seek out the words of Hashem through most likely a prophet. Vayomer Hashem la, she gets the response through a navi. Shnei goyim bevitnech u'shnei leumim mime'ayechi paridu. You're feeling this feeling during your pregnancy because you have 2 nations in your womb and you have 2 different people that will issue from your body. Ulaom milaom ye'ematz. One nation will be mightier than the other. V'rav ya'avod sa'ir. And the older or the greater will serve the younger. Vayimlu'u yameha laledet v'hinei tomim bevitna. Time comes for her to give birth, and indeed she does have twins in her womb. Vayitzei harishon admoni kulo ke'aderet se'ar. The first one emerges and he's red, like covered fully in hair. Vayikru'u shemo Esav, and they name him Esav. Ve'acharechein yatsa achi ve'yado ochezet be'akev Esav. And afterwards his brother comes out and he's holding on to the heel of Esav. Vayikra shemo Yaakov, and they call his name Yaakov. Ve'yitzchak ben shishim shana beledet otam. And yet this is when Yitzchak is 60 years old. And as the boys grow up, Esav becomes a skillful hunter, a man of the field. Yaakov ishtam yoshevo halim, and Yaakov is more of a mild, simple, inside guy. He stays and dwells in the tent in the camp. Vayehav Yitzchak et Esav kitzayid bepiv, and Yitzchak favors Esav because he has food in his mouth. Talk about what that means. Rivka ohevet et Yaakov, and Rivka favors Yaakov. Okay, so it's a very well-known set of psukim, and we'll definitely have a lot of questions. One, of course, is going to be why Yitzchak favors Esav, but first we're going to talk about a little bit Esav's nature, and we're going to follow, just for the beginning of this question, the Midrashic approach. It's very interesting. Typically, Midrashim really paint a much more extreme portrait of our Torah personalities than sometimes the text itself. So in other words, in the text itself we just read, there doesn't seem to be anything so terrible about Esav. Same thing we felt about Yishmael. Same thing we felt about Cain. The text itself doesn't seem to be portraying such a negative character, such a negative personality. But the Midrashim really go crazy talking about the wickedness of Esav, the wickedness of Yishmael, and the wickedness of Cain. That's sort of what we've been exploring. And we're kind of in our same pattern and theme, looking at the text again and saying what references or hints or allusions might have been hidden in these pieces of text that may be leading the Midrash to its approach that these 3 personalities, Cain and Yishmael and Esav, are so negative. Okay, it bothers, I teach high school students during the day, and it always bothers my students when we get to personalities like Vashti is a great example. Esav is another great example, where Vashti, great example, because in actually the text of Megillat Esther, she's heroic. And the Midrash wants to have her have pimples and a tail, and she's this and she's that, right? And so my students are always bothered, and it's a good question to be bothered by. And the answer I try to give is, there's always value to the Medrash. It doesn't literally mean Vashti had a tail and pimples, but there's value to the Medrash if the Medrash is taking an approach that Vashti was more evil than the text, originally portrays, then we have to figure out why the Medrash feels compelled to do that, right? So we can walk away saying, well, I still think she's a heroine, and we can walk away saying she's evil. That's okay, right? Both are okay, but at least we have to give the Midrashic approach its due, its day in court, and investigate why our Chazal saw the negative in Torah personalities who didn't really seem, based on just the simple reading of the text, to really have something so negative about them. So let's assume Esav has a flaw, and let's see if we can figure out what it is based on the psukim that we just read. So we're going to start in Rashi, and Rashi comments on the word admoni, that he was red. So Rashi says, source number 2, Simanhu sheyehe shofech damim. This redness was a sign that he would be a blood spiller. He would be a murderer. He would be a shedder of blood. Okay? So kind of like he's born red, it shows that he has violence in his nature. So we have to spend a few minutes figuring out what exactly this means. Like, what does it mean to be born red? Do we even believe in the concept that a person is born with such an extreme nature? I know we've discussed nature versus nurture. It's the age-old debate, but we're talking about an infant baby here, and his, the Torah looks at him and says, oh, red. This one's going to be violent. He's literally a minutes-old infant. And if so, then is it fair to blame him for his violent streak if this is something that was pre-programmed into his nature? So we have kind of a lot of questions about this. So the Gemara actually debates at length in Masachet Shabbos. We're going to read a piece of it in source 3, but the Gemara debates at length whether we even believe in this type of, the nature of a person. And the discussion is whether we believe that someone born under a particular astrological or sign of the zodiac will be influenced by that zodiac sign to have a certain character trait and quality. If you read your horoscope, you know that, oh, a Pisces is always this and a Sagittarius is always that. So the Gemara debates whether that's a legitimate concept or not. And there are two opinions. Rabbi Chanina says we do believe in the influence of the zodiac, and Rabbi Yochanan says we do not believe in the influence of the zodiac. So picking up in that discussion, the Gemara talks about somebody born under the influence of Mars, Hai man de b'me'adim, and if you really pay attention to the Gemara's word for Mars, it's got that shoresh edom, the red planet. We also call Mars the red planet. Okay, so the Gemara says, if you're born under the influence of Mars, the red planet, yehei gvar ashed dama, you're going to be a murderer, a blood spiller. You're going to be violent, like Rashi says about Esav. There's going to be a streak in your character. We'll debunk this in a minute. Don't worry. I don't want anyone to be worried yet, okay? But the Gemara says, right, that there is this idea, according to Rabbi Chanina, that yesh mazal Yisrael, that we do believe in the influence of the zodiac signs. Again, not everyone agrees, but that we believe in the influence of the zodiac. So if you're born under a certain sign, red, this red thing is that you're always going to be someone who sheds blood. So we don't really know if Esav was born under the sign of Mars. The Torah doesn't tell us when his birthday is, and we can't link it to any type of zodiac. But Admoni, this red nature, doesn't matter what sign he's born under, but the same idea that someone can be at birth sort of influenced by the forces of nature to have a certain personality trait. So Rashi's telling us this is something in his nature. But if we read, it's not really fair. Doesn't sound fair. And if we continue the second part of the Gemara in source number 3, where we left off, we'll see that the Gemara tries to sort of save the day. So Amar Rav Ashi comments on this statement that if you're born under the sign of Mars, you are a blood spiller. So Amar Rav Ashi, I umana, I ganava, I tabacha, I mahola. Well, you can be a bloodletter, which is like a healing thing. You can be a bloodletter, or you can be a thief, or you can be a shochet, or you could be a murderer, or you could be a mohel. There are a lot of ways to be a blood spiller. In other words, there are ways to take a trait. Again, I don't know who's born under what sign. We're not talking about us, okay, or anyone here. But there's ways to take a trait that may be intrinsic to your nature, and it can look very different in different people. So having the nature of a blood spiller is not seals the deal on Esav, he's going to be violent and he's going to be a murderer, but maybe just telling us where his tendencies lie. Amar Rabba. Rabba then comes along and says, Ana b'ma'adim havai. I was born under the sign of Mars. Rabba, he's one of our sages. He goes, hello, born under the sign of Mars. Amar Abaye, his chavrusa, Abaye, comes along and says, Mar name anesh vakatel. Well, yes, you pronounce judgments in court, and like it's like the death sentence to many people. Your judgments are like killing people.
When did this whole order? Because Yaakov and Esau
Great.
were born at the same time.
Great.
They're twins.
Yeah, Yaakov and Esau are born at the same time.
Explain anything.
Amazing. Okay, good. Excellent. So we have to deal with Yaakov because they're twins. We know they're born under the same sign. Like that, we know for sure. We don't know what sign, but whatever is in their nature, if it's influenced by, if it's a zodiac thing and not just another thing of their nature, but if it's influenced by the zodiac, Yaakov has the same personality trait. That's for sure. Okay, but he wasn't described as red. Exactly. So we're like not exactly sure what's going on here with this nature, this, intrinsic trait of being an admoni. Okay, but we do know that David HaMelech was also an admoni. He's described also as red. Yeah, here he's actually described as ruddy, as red. There's some redness to his character. And we know that he actually also, he was a warrior. It was a good thing because he was fighting God's wars to expand the boundaries of the kingdom of Israel. But that's exactly why he's not given permission to build the Beit HaMikdash, which is like his life's dream. God says, I love you, you're amazing, but too bloody. You're like a violent guy. It's great that you've used it for the good. So it's, again, not a definite, not like a, we're not pronouncing Esav an evil guy because of this character, but we're trying to figure out, and what do we do with Yaakov? So Rabbeinu Nisim the Ran in source number 4 also has another question, which is even more deeply philosophical. And he says in source 4, Aval yesh bekan safek shehu tzarich lehitba'er. Okay, he goes, I have a problem with this. Sheyireh mizeh sheha'adam kefi mazalo yihiyeh mamrei be'aveirot urodef b'mitzvot. It sounds like the Gemara is saying you have no chance. Whatever is impacted on your birth, you're going to be a good person, you're going to be a bad person. You might as well stop trying because your nature has already determined what kind of person you're going to be. Sheharei amro sham hayman de betzedek yehei gvar tzadkan. The Gemara, we didn't read the whole thing because it goes through every astrological sign. We focused on Mars because that's relative to Esav, Ma'adim, the red planet. But the Gemara says if you're born under Tzedek, which this translation says Jupiter, he will be a righteous person. Okay, great. So says the Ran, like, right, Hayman Tebet Ma'adim, our line, Yehei Gvar Ashi Daman. Says the Ran, I don't understand this whole concept because it really seems antithetical to what Judaism stands for. V'zebli safek davar matmiya. He says, this is very interesting to me. This amazes me. She'im yimshach ma'aseh hamitzvot o ha'averot kefi hamazal ein kam makom l'schar v'onesh. We place so much emphasis in our philosophical system, in our theology on do mitzvot and get rewarded, do averot and get punished. That's like our whole thing. Like our whole thing is free will, and like you make good choices and you get a good outcome, and you make bad choices and you might not get such a good outcome. That's like the whole thing our Torah is based on. How can now we find out that the Gemara says it's not really based on that? It's really based on it's your nature. You try, don't try, you're going to come out the same at the end. The Ran's really bothered by the philosophy. Yaakov, Esav, we'll get back to them, but the Ran's really bothered by this whole philosophy. So he continues on the next page, same source, but it's just boxed it in on the second page a little. He says, V'yesh bazeh shtei tshuvot. There are actually two ways to approach answering this question. Ki hamazal be'inyan hamitzvot ve'ha'averot notein hachana levad lo machriach. He says, first of all, a mazal, remember, there was also an opinion in the Gemara that there's no such thing as astrology, zodiac having an impact. Okay, so if you are of the school of thought that says, I believe that there's, some impact of what's happening up in the planets and the constellations on the birth of a child born under that sign, then you have to understand that mazal, which we say mazel tov, like congratulations or good luck, but mazal is the word for zodiac or for, a sign, a constellation. Ki hamazal be'inyan hamitzvot v'averot notein hachana levad lo machriach. So it says here in the English, mazal only predisposes, it does not compel. And that's kind of one thing that we were just talking about when we read the Gemara. Ki hanolad b'tzedek, someone born in the sign of Jupiter, which is called tzedek, eino muchrach lihiyot tzadkan. He doesn't have to become a tzaddik. He imuchan lekach. He might have certain natural inclinations that make it easier for him to be righteous, right? He might have a natural inclination or predisposition towards a certain personality type, but certainly is not compelled to be that type of personality. V'chein hanolad b'ma'adim. someone born under the sign of Mars, Eino Mukhrach Lihiyot Shofech Damim, he's not obligated to become a blood spiller. Aval Mukhan Lakach, he might have a certain streak in his personality. It doesn't mean he's going to act on it. It means he has a predisposition. I'm still not so happy. Okay, v'hasvara bazeh, ki hamazal, and he says the reason for this is hamazal poel bagufot ad sheyaseh roshem bahem. If you believe in the system of mazalot, of constellations, so they can have an impact on your body, ve'al kol zeh einenu poel banefesh shehu lamala mimenu. But a mazal can't really have an impact on the development of your soul. Okay, so a mazal, maybe there's some physical trait that can be influenced by the constellations, the alignment of the stars, but that has zero influence, says Rabbeinu Nissim, says the Ran, on the soul of a human. Umitchayev mizeh, and therefore he says, shekol ma shehu nimshach l'dvarim hativim yekfi hamazal, certain physical, natural predispositions might be influenced by a mazal. Aval ma'aseh hamitzvot v'ha'avirot she'ino poel TV yimshach kefi hanagat hanefesh. But your actions, whether they are good or bad, those are guided solely, no pun intended, by your soul. Those are your neshama. That's your free will. That's your human, not what makes you a human form, but a human being. Your soul is what decides what kind of person you are. So whether or not you may or may not agree that there's some influence of the stars, but that only influences your, let's say your instincts, your physicality, your gut instinct. It has absolutely no bearing on your soul. And therefore you can choose actions, good or bad. Even if you're born under the sign of tzedek, you don't end up being righteous if you make bad choices. And even if you're born under the sign of Ma'adim, of Mars, you could totally end up not being a murderer as long as you make a series of good choices. V'zeh al shtei panim. He explains a little further. This is in two respects. Ha'echad mehem shehanefesh mitzad hanhagata laguf efshar la shetishtaneh hatchuna hara'a baguf hanimshechet achar hamazal. Right? The soul can actually change the evil disposition of the body. Right? The soul can have influence over the instincts. You can slowly over time change your physical instincts. You can override something. I used to be a nail biter, right? I didn't want to be a nail biter anymore. And I, with a very hard work, stopped being a nail biter, right? Your soul can make a decision that has an influence over the instincts and habits of your body. Just like we said, someone born under the sign of Mars, there might be like a blood boiling, passionate streak of somebody born under the sign of Mars. Muchan el haritzicha, they might have like a predisposition towards what I don't want to even call violence, but like boiling blood, right? They're red, they're fiery. Al kol zeh hanefesh bekocha mitzad hanagata laguf tashkit haritzicha hahi. However, the soul can quiet that boiling. Zehu atzad harishon. That's one possibility. Your soul can actually work on your instincts and actually tame the instincts of your mazal. Let's get to the second part. Hanefesh tishtamesh ba b'mashu poel tov ratzui v'lo tishtamesh ba b'mashu meguna. Great, we read that already. And the second, ki hamazal, v'hasheni she'im heyot shelo tishkot hareticha, or if the soul can't actually quiet or tame the physical habit, hanefesh tishtamesh ba b'mashu poel tov ratzui v'lo tishtamesh ba b'mashu meguneh. You can just channel, let's say, a specific trait to be used for, I didn't change my passionate nature, but I channeled my passion for something positive. So either my soul can actually quiet, can actually override the instincts of my nature, or says Drashot Haran, or says Rabbeinu Nissim, the person can channel their natural instinct into doing something good. And then the Ran quotes our Gemara, you can be a mohel or you can be a murderer. Either way, you're spilling blood. You can be a surgeon or you could be a thief. Either way, you're spilling blood, but one is channeled to the positive and one is channeled to the negative. And then he ends just by saying, and I thought this was a very good line, important line, it is seen then that a mazal cannot compel the doing of mitzvot or transgressions. your mazel, your instinct can't force you to make a certain behavioral choice one way or the other, but it can only create a predisposition, and the soul has power over that predisposition. Okay, so just because Esav, let's even say Admoni, meant that he was born with a certain predisposition to violence, and maybe even Yaakov was born with a predisposition to violence, right? Maybe they both were born under that sign, but it's the soul that has power over that predisposition. And therefore, coming back to Esav, he certainly stood a fair chance. Okay, we are all born with qualities. We're all born, I'm very stubborn. I've always been stubborn. My parents make fun of me that I have some stubborn children. They tell me I got what's coming to me, right? Stubbornness is a quality I seemingly have always had. I didn't learn to be stubborn. I just was born with a stubborn streak. But it doesn't mean that I have to, there's good things about a stubborn streak. A lot of times I can use it to stand up for what I think is right, and I'm not like going to give in to the flow, right, of the crowd. That's a good way to use a stubborn streak. A bad way is to be stubborn and, inflexible when you need to be flexible. So just because someone is born with a certain nature, like Esav, doesn't mean, and that then therefore is not what the pasuk is telling us. It's not telling us he was born with the nature of an Admoni, but what is it telling us? That his tendency stood out, right? Yaakov also, in theory, was born with this nature if it was a zodiac sign, but only Esav is described as an Admoni. He didn't have to give in to that pull. His soul was not predisposed to violence. His body may have been passionate and fiery. His soul should have had influence, or could have had, jury is out, we'll see, could have had influence over his actions. He could have overcome that violent nature and channeled it into something positive. So now we want to see, is there any evidence that he channeled it into something positive, which I think is a fair question. We're just let Esav off the hook here. Like, just because you were born Admoni doesn't mean that you are a person who, is violent. So let's look at not the birth of Esav and this character of being an Admoni, but let's look at him later in life and see, does he act upon his nature, or is he able to overcome that nature? So Rashi, again, based on our original psukim, Rashi takes the phrase, Esav is an ish sadeh, right? He's an ish yodei atzayid, he's a hunter, and he's an ish sadeh, he's a man of the field. And Rashi says, kemashma'o, as it sounds, Adam batel, like a guy who had no regular, he wasn't like a hunter for his job. He just had no regular occupation. And he just kind of wandered around shooting at things. Okay, and Rashi's basically saying he was hunting for sport. That's acting on his violent nature. That's not hunting to provide food for his family, although he did, right? But Rashi seems to interpret ish sadeh as a man who's hefker, right? A man who's kind of ownerless like a field, right? He doesn't have a 9-to-5 job or even and anything. He doesn't even have a part-time job. He wanders around shooting at things, according to Rashi. Okay, it's not a nice look at Esav, but let's see if we can take it a little further. So the Sforno continues. He expands on this idea, and he's actually, first I want to just show you the next two psukim, the ones we didn't read. These are also famous. This is in this coming week's parsha. My kids reminded me yet again to make red lentil stew for Shabbos. I say it literally every year. I've never done it once. I'm going to shoot for the Shabbos. Vayized Yaakov Nazid, right? One time Yaakov was making stew. Vayavo Esav min hasadeh v'hu ayef. Esav came in for the field and he was tired. Vayomer Esav el Yaakov, and Esav says to Yaakov, Haliteni na min ha'adom hazeh. Give me some of that red stuff. It's not a coincidence that it was red. Ki ayef anochi, because I'm so tired. Al kain karashimo edom. And for this, not for coming out Admoni, coming out red, but for asking for that red stuff, his nickname gets changed from Esav, his name gets changed, or his nickname becomes Edom. Okay, so Sforno comments on the nickname Edom. Al-Kain, Karashimo Edom. It's the weirdest thing. We could have called him Edom at birth. He was Admoni. It was a very fitting nickname. You didn't have to wait till he was a man to give him this nickname. So Sforno comments, Kishira'u shekol kach hitmaker lemalachto hanifsedet. When Yaakov saw that Esav was so consumed by his hunting, right? By his violent pursuit. Asher lo kitoret ha'adam, right? Doesn't represent the task of man on earth, meaning he's not killing animals for food. That is, if there are any vegetarians, I apologize. right? That is an okay and acceptable relationship between man and animals. But he is not doing the thing that men are supposed to do on earth, but he's just consumed by this sort of like violence. Ad shelo hikir banazid ki'im b'tzivo. He couldn't even call it by its proper name. He couldn't say, can I have some stew? But he literally is seeing red, right? This is like a play on the words of the psukim. He can only see its color. Karashimo Edom. His name gets changed to Edom. Lashon sivui. It's like an imperative. Like kilomar hit adem. Be the red guy. Like you're becoming red. V'hayat savua Edom behalatat Edom. Paint yourself red by swallowing the red dish. Sforno says he was red. We knew that already. And if we wondered whether he acted upon it or channeled it for the positive or overcame it, Sforno says no, he was so bloodthirsty. He was so steeped in the violence of his occupation, which wasn't a real job, right? That he literally saw red. He couldn't even identify the stew by name or ingredient, but instead he could only identify it by color. And here's where we're going to look at a Malbim that we've looked at before, and I'm just going to skim. But Malbim explains why this is. And the Malbim says, Lazeh Yatsu, and just the underline. Malbim's going back to the fighting of the babies in Rivka's womb. He says, Lazeh Yatsu Esav v'Yakov lihiyot dugma el haklal. Remember, in these early stories in Tanakh, they are real stories of real people, but they are also paradigmatic of the nature of human beings because these are our earliest ancestors, right? So they were a dugma. They were also not just a pair of twins, but they were a dugma el haklal. They were a paradigm for the future. Zeh le'umat hachomer, v'zeh le'umat hatzura. One of them represented physicality, and one of them represented spirituality. So Esav represents a focus on the physicality, the physical form, and Yaakov represents the soul that gives that form, that gives meaning to that form. So Yaakov is steeped in spirituality, Esav is steeped in physicality, meaning he gave in to that mazal. Remember, the mazal can have influence over your guf, but it can't have influence over your nefesh, over your neshama. But Esav is a guf. Doesn't mean he didn't have a soul. Of course he had a neshama. He's a living, breathing human being. He had a brain, he had thoughts, he had feelings. But as a paradigm, he's the paradigm of, according to the Malbim, physicality. His soul was not more powerful than his body. And therefore, of course he gave in, says the Malbim. He doesn't say it, but that's what he would say if we asked him tonight. Of course he gave in to the pull of his mazal. Let's assume we agree for the moment that yesh mazal Yisrael, that we believe in mazalot, in constellations. Of course he gave in to the pull. In order to override that pull, your soul needs to be stronger than your body, which might answer the Yaakov question. That if Yaakov is a soul who gives meaning to a guf, then even if he was born under the sign of Mars and had that red character trait, his soul is strong enough, is stronger than his guf, right? His spirituality is stronger than his physicality, and therefore perhaps he's able to override his instinct and his nature. Okay, that's one option. This actually fits really beautifully with Rav Hirsch in Source 9's explanation of each of their names. Esav's speciality was his outward appearance, not his personality. It means like his personage, his personhood, not like his inside traits, but his outside traits. Yaakov's Ishtam, Yoshev Ohalim, Yaakov, his name Yaakov, lay in what he was doing or in the position he adopted. So Yaakov's named for what he's doing when he's born, which is grabbing a heel. He's named for his actions. Esav is named for his color or his hairiness. Esav might be, there's a whole discussion of how Esav relates, but it probably relates to his hairiness. Okay, and his nickname Edom is his color. So Rav Hirsch points out, yes, the focus on Esav was his outward appearance, and Yaakov is named for his actions. Not that there's so much meaning in grabbing at the heel, but it's an action versus an appearance. He's named for something he's doing. Remember what we said in Drashot Haran, in Rabbeinu Nissim's comment in Source 4, we believe that actions are what determine a person's character in Judaism, not nature. So you could have this violent streak, but if you are a good person and you do good deeds, you're judged on your deeds. So Yaakov is a person of deeds, and Esav is a person who's steeped only in his physical form. That's Rav Hirsch agreeing with the Malbim and with Sforno. And I thought that was such an interesting explanation. I never thought of Yaakov that way. It is a deed. Okay, so Esav is known for his redness. He's red, he's Edom, and Yaakov is the doer of deeds. He develops into the spiritual, into the soul. The pairing of Yaakov and Esav is a paradigm for us on physicality versus spirituality. Now we come to our real question, though. If so, what's with Yitzchak? Why is he favoring? Does he not see it? I literally could have asked this question last week. What's with Avraham? We asked it actually last week. What's with Avraham? Does he not see Yishmael's behavior? And we had a whole answer. Okay, he believed that Yishmael could do teshuvah. Same question. What's with Yitzchak? Why can't he see Esav for who he truly was? And there are really many ways to answer this question. We don't have time to do them all. And I didn't even plan to do them all. Okay? In fact, years ago in Midrasha together, we talked about Yitzchak and Esav, both being an Ish Sadeh. They're both described as an Ish Sadeh. They both have this lonely, aloof character. Yitzchak prefers to go daven in a field. He spends a lot of time alone at a well. Esav's always roaming out in the field. So we spoke about certain things that they had in common that perhaps Yitzchak saw in Esav some piece of himself. So that's a good answer. We did that one already. We're not going to do that one tonight. But the Mefarshim ask our same question. Like, what's the deal with Yitzchak? Why does he favor Esav if Esav, we just said, not only has this violent nature, but is acting upon it? So the Chizkuni starts us off. He says, Vaye'ehav Yitzchak et Esav, gabe Yitzchak tiv Vaye'ehav. When it comes to Yitzchak preferring Esav, the Torah uses the past tense. Lelamdecha, and Yitzchak loved Esav. It is in the past. It's fair to say it in the past, but we're going to contrast it with Rivka. Okay? Yitzchak loved past tense Esav. Lelamdecha, and this teaches you, Shelo haya Yitzchak ohavo tamid. He doesn't actually favor Esav. Ela be'otozman kitzayid bepiv. But only at those times where Esav is feeding him. He loves the food. He's very appreciative that Esav always brings him food. It's we're a little hard on Esav here. Aval gabe Yaakov, we'll see some other answers also. Aval gabe Yaakov, shehaya ish tam, Yaakov, who's just a simple scholarly guy, ketiv be v'rivka ohevet et Yaakov. The verb ohevet is an ongoing verb. Okay, now we might not like the Chizkuni's explanation, but it's a great pickup on the difference between vaye'ehav and ohevet in the very same pasuk. I'm like an editor by my nature. I'm an editor by nature. Okay, I love to find the mistakes and correct them. And this would not fly in an English class, in an essay. This would not. You got to watch your tenses, right? I'm sure you remember getting that on your papers and your children's. That's the thing. Watch your tenses. It always has to be. So what's going on in this pasuk? So Chizkuni says, well, it's telling you that Yaakov's love for Esav is not Yitzchak's love for Esav, is not ongoing. The way Rivka's love for Yaakov is ahavat hadira. It's constant. She really favors Yaakov. Yitzchak, so far we don't know if he has a favorite, according to Chizkuni, but he really does have strong, warm feelings of affection for Esav when Esav is bringing him delicious food. Okay. That might be, by the way, I quoted this Mishnah because it was too good to pass up. The Mishnah says, Kol in Pirkei Avot, source 11, Kol ahava shehi tluya bedavar, any love that's conditional, batel davar b'tehila ahava. Once that condition goes away, the love goes away too. So if your love for your son is based on his culinary skills, and then he moves away from home, or he decides to stop cooking, or I don't know, he loses his taste and he can't cook so nicely for you, so then the love is batel, is going to disappear. V'she'ena tluya b'davar, but if your love is unconditional, eina b'tela le'olam. Now the Mishnah goes on and uses other examples of which is the type of conditional love, Amnon and Tamar, which is unconditional, David and Yonatan. It's a fascinating Mishnah. There's a lot to say about it, but just in light of what the Chizkuni just told us, it's Yitzchak's love for Esav seems to be, according to Chizkuni, conditional, and therefore it's not an enduring love. Batel davar, once the culinary skills go away, b'tela ha'ava, the love is going to go away too. It's an interesting approach. Rashi takes a totally different approach, and it actually is an approach that allows for Yitzchak to deeply love and favor Esav. So totally different approach here in source number 12. Rashi says, Yodei Atzayid. Rashi says, what does it mean? He knew how to hunt. He's a man who was Ish Yodei Atzayid. Just call him an Ish Tzayid, a hunter. What's an Ish Yodei Atzayid? It's like if I say I'm a teacher versus I know how to teach. In one case, I may not be a teacher. right? I might just think I know how to teach. In the other case, my occupation is teacher. So why is the Torah calling Esav an Ish Yodei Atzayid and not just an Ish Tzayid, a hunter? What's the thing here? So Rashi and like a million other Mefarshim who agree, Latsud v'leramot et aviv. It doesn't mean he was a hunter. That's Ish Tzayid. Yodei Atzayid is he knows how to hunt and trap. And who is he hunting and trapping? His father. He's deceiving and trapping his father with his words. Visho kitzayid bipiv, right? The Torah says Yitzchak prefers Esav kitzayid bipiv because he has entrapment in his mouth. He's tricky. Visho alo Abba, and he would ask his father, Abba, hey ach me'asrin et hamelach ve'et hateven. Tell me more about the tithes of salt and straw. He's like pretended to be interested in halacha. And there was no halacha then, but that's besides the point. He pretended to be interested in like how to be a better Jew. Kisavur aviv shehu medakdek b'mitzvot, and his father was deceived. He was taken in, right? It's not the first time Yitzchak's going to get deceived by his sons. He was, I guess, a little gullible, okay? Esav took him in. He deceived him. Yodei Atzayid, he knows how to hunt and trap. Rashi says that cannot be taken literally about hunting because that's Ish side. Okay, so Yitzchak really does deeply love and favor Esav, but it's based on a false premise, says Rashi, that Esav would come to him with these very like tricky questions about like Torah and Jewish law, and Yitzchak, they all have the same letter. It's so crazy. Yitzchak would say, "Look at my son, a Talmid Chacham. I'm so proud." Okay, but it wasn't real, says Rashi. Now, time out. The four sons at the Pesach Seder. The Rasha asks a very good question also. Okay, so just because you could ask, I'm not saying Esav's the Rasha, and I'm not saying even the Rasha is the Rasha. Okay, I don't know how I feel about the four sons. They're clearly meant to be stereotypes. Okay, but the Rasha asks a good question. Okay, it's not as good a question as the Chacham, but it's still a good question. And there's much made about the fact that in the order that we recite them, the Rasha comes second, not last, because he was a very smart guy. The Rasha, right? That wicked son, he knew a lot of stuff. It takes a lot of smarts to be that cunning. Okay, so Esav actually knew some Torah. He wasn't, immune to the influence of his household, but he used it to manipulate his father into seeing him in a way that he may not have really been. Rav Hirsch gives another explanation. What's with the favoritism of Yitzchak to Esav? So I love this, Rav Hirsch. He says, opposites attract. Right? We knew that in romantic relationships, but Rav Hirsch says opposites always attract. So that Yitzchak's sympathies were more inclined towards Esav and Rivka's to Yaakov can moreover easily be explained by the attraction of opposites. We see Yitzchak risen up again from death on the altar. He was nearly sacrificed, preferring to withdraw from the bustle of the world, we mentioned, in Ish Sadeh, and to live quietly in the proximity of the desert, living at the well of Be'er L'chai Ro'i, away from the busy traffic of men. He's a hermit. That Esav's lusty, active nature appealed to him, and that he perhaps saw in him a force which he had lost, could be a support to the home, would be quite possible. He admires something in Esav that he himself doesn't possess. That's part of opposites attracting. Rivka, on the other hand, saw in Yaakov's whole being a picture of a life unfolding, a scholarly, Torah, devoted to God life, which in her father's house she had never had the remotest idea. So it seems, says Rav Hirsch, that each parent sees something in an opposite trait in a different child, and they're drawn to it. Okay, so perhaps this has nothing to do with Esav being deceptive. This has nothing to do with maybe Yitzchak only favors him because he likes his food. This is saying, Rav Hirsch is giving all credit to both, that Esav had this like active out there in the world. He was like full of zest of life. And Yitzchak admired it because he had lost his zest for life. He had become withdrawn. And he admired. He couldn't do it himself, but he realized it was kind of necessary for life to go on, right? Everyone can't just withdraw and be an isolationist. An Esav might be very necessary for this family, says Yitzchak, according to Rav Hirsch. Malbim offers 3 reasons. Malbim says, in source number 14, Vayehav Yitzchak, maybe it's because Shechashav Shehu HaBechor. Maybe because he has a natural affinity for his firstborn. Vehu HaRa'ui Li Rash HaMatanot HaElokut. He assumes, it's not going to end up being true, but he assumes that as the Bechor, Esav will be the one eligible to receive God's blessings, the spiritual and physical legacy of his father Yitzchak. V'hulo shama sherav yavod tza'ir. Remember, Rivka had the benefit of a prophecy that the younger would be greater. Yitzchak never heard that prophecy. He says, okay, the oldest is my Bechor. The Bechor is supposed to be, even though it never works out that way, the Bechor is supposed to be the one who inherits. Okay, great. So maybe because he's the Bechor. Or maybe because he's impressed with Esav's accomplishments as a hunter, which Esav is always happy to talk about. Tzayid b'piv, he loved to talk about his, oh, you should see what I killed and hunted today. I'm the best hunter around. Maybe Yitzchak appreciated those stories and admired Esav for that skill. Oh, kechazal, you were waiting for me to bring up this chazal, or like chazal say, shehaya mevi lo min hatzayid v'chashav shemekayem mitzvat kivod, kibudav. Right? Famous chazal. Well, Esav's really good at kibudav ve'im. He's, that's a really great quality that he possessed in spades. He didn't just make food for his dad. He made food for his father. He brought him his favorite dishes. He cared so much about his kavod aviv, the kavod of his father. So 3 reasons, says the Malbim, that perhaps Yaakov legitimately favored Esav. He's the Bechor. Maybe we could even put them together. He's not just the Bechor, but he's he's very skilled. He has a great talent in life. So he claims as a hunter. And he pays a lot of attention to Yaakov in a way that Yaakov doesn't interpret as, sycophantic or kissing up, but he takes it as kibud avim, which it very well may have been. So Rabbi Menachem Leibtag actually has a fascinating approach to all of Sefer Breshit, which I'm sure he's spoken about here before. I took one tiny piece, but let me explain in 20 seconds the backstory. He says the Avot all knew that there would be an Am Yisrael. They just didn't know in which generation it would be. So when Avraham has children, he's like, maybe there'll be one tribe, the tribe of Yitzchak. There'll be the Jewish people will be the Bnei Yitzchak. Doesn't end up coming to pass. So when Yitzchak gives birth to 2 sons, he says, maybe this is the 2 tribes of Israel, the Yaakovites and the Esavites, right? They don't know when the tribes, it's going to be the next generation. But they don't know that yet, right? They don't know that there are going to be 12 sons. So there is no apparent reason, says Rabbi Leibtag, for Yitzchak to assume that only 1 son is to be chosen. When it comes to the tribes, they're all chosen, right? Yaakov, all 12 sons are chosen. So there's no reason for Yitzchak to assume that only 1 is to be chosen and the other rejected. Unlike Yitzchak and Yishmael, who come from different mothers. So, okay, it makes sense, says Yitzchak, that I wasn't the tribe, that we weren't the generation of becoming Am Yisrael. My brother Yishmael had a different mother. He wasn't eligible. But in my case, of my children, both Yaakov and Esav are born from the same mother. In fact, they are twins. Therefore, it is only logical for us to presume that Yitzchak assumes that both Yaakov and Esav are chosen. And Rabbi Leibtag explains, if you're going to build a nation, you need the learners and the earners, right? You need those who are going to sit and study. You need the intellects, you need the thinkers, you need the think tank, but you also need the people who are out there and getting it done. So Esav's out there getting it done, and Yaakov's thinking and learning. Perfect. And by the way, of the 2, which one because he's the one that's out there in the world, he's going to be the leader of the 2. They're both going to be tribes. But if we have to pick a leader, of course it's going to be Esav. He's more worldly. He's more aggressive, assertive. He's the hunter and gatherer, right? He's going to get it done. So Rabbi Leibtag explains this favoritism may have been very well placed. And perhaps this is what Sforno means in his comment that I never paid attention to until preparing for this year. I've heard Rabbi Leibtag speak many times. I never noticed this Sforno. Vaye'ahav Yitzchak et Esav, and Yitzchak loved Esav, says Sforno gam et Esav. What does that mean? He also favored Esav, meaning he equally favored his 2 sons. Rivka ohevet et Yaakov. Rivka only loved Yaakov. But Yitzchak saw something in Esav that he felt may have been worthy of being the leader of Klal Yisrael, one of the 2 leaders, one of the 2 tribes. So Yitzchak loved both his sons, and he favored them, give me 1 more minute, both equally. He thinks and he hopes that both his children will carry his legacy forward, the Jewish legacy and the building of a nation. So why could this have not happened? Like, why not? Why is this not what happened? Right? Why wasn't this true? Because in the end, it's only Yaakov who carries his legacy forward. So this is our last question, last source. This is an unbelievable source, and it has a lot to do with being a teacher and a parent. It's just an unbelievable idea. Says Rav Hirsch. First of all, you should know about Rav Hirsch that he has no qualms criticizing the Avot and Imahot, and that's okay. Some commentaries say, no, it's Abraham, it's Yitzchak, they're on a pedestal, and others say they were real people. We have to learn from their successes and failures. Rav Hirsch is of the opinion that it's important to view the Avot as people with both strengths and weaknesses. So he starts by saying our sages, who never objected to draw attention to the small and great mistakes and weaknesses in the history of our great forefathers, and thereby make them just the more instructive for us, meaning it's good to call attention to the weaknesses even of our Avot and Imahot, because it's more instructive for us. We can learn from their mistakes. Here too, on Vayigdalu, they make a remark which is indeed a signpost for all of us. They point out that the striking contrast in the grandchildren of Avraham, meaning Yitzchak, Yaakov, and Esav, may have been due not so much to a difference in their temperaments as to mistakes in the way that they were brought up. As long as they were little, no attention was paid to the slumbering differences in their natures. Both had exactly the same teaching and educational treatment, and the great law of education, chanoch lena'ar al pi darko, that you have to bring up each child in his own way, was forgotten. That each child must be treated differently with an eye to the slumbering tendencies of his nature. And out of those tendencies, he must be educated to develop his special characteristics for the one pure human and Jewish life. Had Yitzchak and Rivka studied Esav's nature and character early enough and asked themselves, how maybe could even an Esav, how can all the strength and energy, the agility, the courage that lies slumbering in this child be won over to be used in the service of God? Like, how can we make Esav into a David HaMelech? If they would have thought of that sooner, then Yaakov and Esav, with their totally different natures, could still have remained twin brothers in spirit and life. They could have carried the legacy forward. Quite early in life, Esav's sword and Yaakov's spirit could have worked hand in hand. And who can say what a different aspect the whole history of the ages might have presented? But as it was, Vayigdalu HaNe'arim, they grew up the same. They're lumped together there, and they grew up. Only when the boys had grown into men, one was surprised to see that out of one and the self-same womb, having had exactly the same care, training, and schooling, two such contrasting persons emerge. In other words, says Rav Hirsch, Esav 100% could have been raised. It's really not his fault, Rav Hirsch is saying. He could have been raised to channel those admoni qualities that really do bring a lot to the table, that life force, that assertiveness, that zest for life, that aggressive piece of his personality. But his special character was ignored, and he and Yaakov were raised the same. And it worked for Yaakov because it channeled Yaakov's, it spoke to Yaakov's nature, and it didn't work for Esav. So instead of Esav's nature getting channeled and nurtured, his nature fought against his nurture. And like we said, his nature won. He was a real man of the earth. He was a real physical guy. And so Esav will say, really, I don't want to say through no fault of his own, but through very little fault of his own, and maybe through some common and simple mistakes in how he was raised, sort of didn't have the opportunity to channel those qualities for the good, and therefore gets written out of the story. Okay. Stop recording. Thank you so much. Thank you. Sorry to keep you 5 minutes late. And have a wonderful night.
Thank you.
Is there a reason? No, it's whatever Rabbi Shantai asked. I know. So I wonder if it's like, yeah, in the middle. No, I know. Okay. Are people here to just ask, just saying the time? Or right.
Whenever before COVID, like I'm not a singer, but all right. Yeah, no, it's See you tomorrow.
I have like a 2 hour, an hour view on my phone, but it's not.
I'll stop by the first one.
Oh, that's fine. I got a ride.
Okay.
It wasn't planned that way. Okay, she was walking, I was walking, and then we decided to wait. Okay. I know. But it is. I'm gonna. Thank you.
Have a wonderful night.